you.
Forget about your...
Okay, so I'm not using the stopwatch.
So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to one of the 3 keynote speeches of the last day of EARLI 2025 conference. It is my great honor and pleasure to chair the keynote speech by Professor Eveline Gutzwiller Helfenfinger. I'm sorry, my German doesn't help me to pronounce it. And thank you very much all for being here for this talk, which I'm sure it will be very stimulating and very inspiring about a very timely and such an important topic. So I will say a few words about our esteemed colleague. So Eveline Gutzwiller Helfenfinger is a professor of educational and social sciences at the Schwyz University of Teacher Education in Switzerland. She obtained her master's degree in general psychology, pedagogy, and in English literature from the University of Basel. Her dissertation on social perspective taking in adolescence was awarded the Lazarus Award of the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Bern. Eveline has held positions at several universities in Germany and Switzerland, including, for example, the University of Leipzig as an interim full professor, the Interdisciplinary Center for Integration and Migration Research at the University of Duisburg-Essen as a guest professor, and the University of Freiburg as senior researcher. The primary research and teaching interests of Eveline encompass socio-moral development and education across the lifespan and teachers' professional development with a particular focus on the intersection of these 2 domains. Focal points of her research include school bullying and its moral dimensions, the prevention of and early intervention in school bullying, the professional ethos of teachers, the role of socio-moral competences in teaching and learning, the phenomenon of happy victimizing in adolescence and adulthood, and moral disengagement and aggression. Very timely topics, as we all agree, I think. She developed qualitative and mixed method approaches to assess individuals' socio-moral functioning. Eveline served as the coordinator of EARLI SIG 13, Moral and Democratic Education from 2019 to 2023, and was the recipient of the Maslovati Award for the Best EARLI SIG 13 Senior Researcher Publication in 2015. Since 2016, she has been engaged in the instruction of further education courses on bullying prevention for students, teachers, and school teams. In addition, since 2017, she has served as the anti-bullying expert for Liechtenstein Child Protection. From 2019 to 2023, she fulfilled the role of working group leader in the Coast Action Transnational Collaboration on Bullying, Migration, and Integration at school level, and she is currently serving as the co-chair of the Coast Action Religious, Identity, Bullying, and Well-being at School, and transnational collaboration. So thank you very much, Eveline, for being with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Eveline.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, dear Eleftheria. No worries at all. This is also the moment to thank the EARLI board, the program committee, and the president for hosting this inspiring conference and inviting me as a keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am honored to talk to you today. The conference theme, Realizing Potentials Through Education, Shaping the Minds and Brains for the Future, conceives of education as contributing to the flourishing of each individual and of society as a whole. One avenue towards enabling the realization of these potentials refers to the promotion of socio-moral competencies. This is what I'm going to talk about today. My talk, Education as Empowerment to Shape the Future, Promoting Learners' Flourishing Through Socio-moral Growth, emphasizes the role of socio-moral and social-emotional competencies in educational settings. I argue that schools and educational institutions must provide their learners not only with opportunities to learn, but with opportunities to grow. These opportunities for growth refer to the development of socio-moral and social-emotional competencies that enable learners to successfully and responsibly interact and collaborate with others, form meaningful social relationships, and contribute as active agents to the shaping of their environment and, of course, their school environment. Social-emotional and socio-moral competencies have been shown to be key factors for academic adjustment and success in both school and in out-of-school settings. At school, these competencies are developed further and promoted in the context of social relationships, especially between teachers and students, and between students themselves. In my conceptual keynote, I will highlight 3 core areas of socio-moral and social-emotional functioning and development that have a significant impact on learners' academic and non-academic flourishing. The quality of social relationships at school, teachers' own socio-moral and social-emotional functioning as part of their professionalism, and school climate and culture. To concretize these associations, I will use the phenomenon of school bullying as an example and refer to the concept of a whole education approach as a way of aligning educational efforts at different levels of the educational system. I will conclude my lecture with a brief discussion of some of the educational conditions necessary for the exercise of socio-moral agency as a means of promoting one's own flourishing and the flourishing of others. As a starting point, I invite you to pause for a moment and look back to your own school life. What did you like or even love about it? What was not so good? What and who contributed to your succeeding or maybe sometimes failing academically? What role did your teachers and classmates play in this? What about the school as a whole? Maybe you remember moments in your school life where you felt happy in your circle of friends or elevated when you successfully finished an assignment after your teacher's support. Or other moments when you were angry because you felt you did not really belong, or felt devastated because you had again been picked on by some of your classmates. Or maybe you watched one of your classmates being picked on and felt helpless and didn't know what to do. We all experienced similar moments or saw someone experience moments like these. The social interactions and relationships students experience contribute to shaping their learning processes and behavior, as well as the associated learning outcomes. At the core of these interactions and relationships lies the self in relationship, which itself is the basis for all socio-moral and social-emotional competencies. Let us explore this now. In the conference theme, it automatically switched. I'm sorry, I didn't do that, and I didn't program it to do that. So there is a spirit present, so I will keep an eye on it. I'm sorry for that. So, in the conference theme, education is envisioned as, I quote, empowering individuals to discover their strengths and develop talents that positively influence their lives and their communities. End of quotation. We are all aware that today's world offers both challenges and opportunities. Since the early 2000s, the age we live in has sometimes been called the Anthropocene. The term refers to a geologic epoch starting in the middle of the 20th century and is meant to describe the vast impact human societies are having on our planet. Although the specific conception of the Anthropocene is being debated within the scientific community of environmental science, its essence captures many of the changes in our life worlds that we have been experiencing and observing. Reed Larson's statement in his article on positive development in a disorderly world expresses this as follows. Young people, I quote, need to develop competencies to navigate an adult world that is complex and disorderly. A world of heterogeneous macro to micro ecological systems containing contradictions and catch-22s. Political systems, community institutions, family, all exhibit dynamics that can sometimes be just plain bizarre. Globalization and modernization have not created a more orderly world for youth. End of quotation. We only have to think of current political, technological, ecological, and economic developments and crises, their dynamics, and the difficulty of envisioning a stable, safe, and sustainable future for all individuals on our planet to relate to Larson's statements. So, what can we do to help young people develop these competencies for navigating a complex world? If young people are to realize their potentials, that is, to lead meaningful, productive lives and contribute to shaping their social, natural, communal, and political environment, we cannot see them as just passive recipients of educational efforts. Instead, our students need to develop a sense of agency, and they also need to exercise agency themselves. According to Bandura, I quote, "To be an agent is to intentionally produce certain effects by one's actions." End of quotation. Bandura describes agency as the power to shape one's environment and life course. Thus, the core concept really is children, youth are not just passive recipients in the educational systems. They co-shape these environments, they co-shape their development, and they need to be empowered to do so. In a developmental context, and drawing on Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model, Hayes and colleagues conceive of children as agents and learners who construct their knowledge through interactions with educators and other children. The experiences children make in the context of these interactions are integrated and interpreted in their personal meaning-making. This social interactionist understanding of learning and development emphasizes the relevance of social interactions and of social relationships that build on that interactional foundation. In an educational context, this understanding underlines the circumstance that social relationships in school form the basis for all teaching learning processes. The quality of these relationships has been shown to affect students' academic and non-academic outcomes. Before I'm going to present some evidence of this impact, I will briefly introduce the concept of socio-moral competences and the underlying self in relationship. And now is the moment for that slide. So, fingers crossed. The term socio-moral establishes a link between the social and the moral in human interaction. It emphasizes that in the context of social relationships, we are expected to do what is right and good, that is, treat others with benevolence and kindness, as John Gibbs puts it. The aim of such benevolence and also respect is to not harm other people's welfare and to protect or restore it in cases where it has been violated. This represents a normative, universal understanding of morality as a behavioral code which might be maintained, enacted by all rational individuals and which, very importantly, relates to all humans, irrespective of social class, religion, nationality, and so forth. So every human being is deserving of this kind of benevolence, kindness, protection of welfare. So what do I mean by socio-moral competencies? Socio-moral competencies include, among others, role-taking, knowledge of social and moral rules, moral judgments, moral emotions, empathy, altruism, pro-sociality, interpersonal negotiation strategies, and conflict resolution. Monika Keller and Tina Malti state that socio-moral competencies form the basis of various components of social competencies, like democratic skills, social responsibility, pro-social behavior, and solidarity. At the core of socio-moral competencies is the so-called social cognitive process component of social perspective taking and coordination. It describes individuals' ability to overcome their own egocentric point of view and consider and coordinate the perspectives of self and other on increasing levels of complexity. You see here on the slide the developmental progression postulated and substantiated empirically by Robert Selman and colleagues, and I'm going to give you a brief walkthrough. So on the left-hand side, you have a kind of depiction of self and other and the potential coordination between perspectives. The self is the green dot, the other is the blue dot, and also the yellow dot for the outside perspective, and the arrows show the direction of coordination of perspectives, of viewpoints at a given stage. So, for example, level 0, egocentric, undifferentiated, means that the coordination operation, what you see in the rightmost column, means I understand my own perspective, but I don't have any idea that you might also have a perspective of your own. So that's where we all set out, that's where we all start. And in the developmental progression, we are able, for example, self-reflective reciprocal, to see ourselves through the eyes of the other. I know what you know, and you know what I know, and I know that you know what I know. Third-person perspective means I am in an interpersonal interaction, and I can partially step out of myself and observe myself in interaction with the other, and also understand how we mutually impact on each other in this interaction. And this is something that I postulate is a very important capacity for teachers, so that they really are able to partially step outside themselves and observe their interactions, classroom interactions, and these mutual relationships. And on the last level, level 4, we are able not only to coordinate different kinds of perspectives on different levels of abstraction, but also to understand something like generalized and in-depth perspectives. For example, what would be an ecological perspective on that? What is the legal perspective, the political dimension, a gender perspective, and so on. And we are not only able to grasp these, to coordinate them, but we can also relate them back to ourselves. So let's digest this for a moment. Understanding the perspectives of self and others involves both cognitive and emotional processes. Thus, socio-moral competencies, with this social perspective taking, this self in relationship at the core, have an inherent emotional component, as documented in moral developmental research during the last 5 decades. For example, in research on the so-called happy victimizer phenomenon, starting with Gertrud Nunnal-Winkler and Beate Sodian, on the development of moral emotions, for example, Tina Malti and Brigitte Latzko's work, or on the moral self and identity, starting with Augusto Blasi, continued, for example, by Tobias Krettenauer. Indeed, socio-moral competencies like empathy and perspective-taking have also been conceptualized as facets of social-emotional intelligence. And so we see that the concepts are coming together, even within and across different research traditions. And this suggests a considerable overlap between the social, the moral, and the emotional. I am not going to enter the debate about the nature of progression in development, that is, whether we should conceptualize it as discrete stages, accumulation, or an ascending spiral, and so forth. The message here is that understanding another's perspective and relating it to one's own, and basing your interactions on that understanding, is a demanding and sometimes challenging undertaking. It is something we as adults have mastered in many domains and areas of our social lives, but children and youth are still developing this capacity. Hence, in order to do what is right and good and consider other persons' welfare, we must be able to coordinate the perspectives of self and others. And we need to conceive of and experience ourselves as agents, that is, be empowered to act based on that understanding. In Reed Larson's words, competencies for agency are, I quote, abilities to organize and regulate actions over time to work toward a long-term goal as an individual or with others in complex real-world contexts. End of quotation. And of course, school is such a complex real-world context. So, to be able to do that, to exercise agency, we employ the agentic properties of forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness as identified by Albert Bandura. Thus, in social contexts, we learn to think ahead about the potential consequences of our actions for others. We regulate our social behavior through self-sanctions and reflect on the soundness of our actions and values, as well as on their morality and meaning. This is what is meant by socio-moral agency here. Developing such socio-moral agency calls for favorable environments that offer us opportunities to grow, to develop, to be active agents, to interact with others, to learn from these interactions. Educational contexts play a central role here. The developing agentic self is understood as a self in relationship, and we can really call this here the self in relationship. And so this is the position I take here. I feel that social cognition is inherently social and not just the application of cognitive processes on social content. It is intrinsically social and we as human animals are social animals, meaning that the self in relationship is the way we tick. This is my position. So, this self as relationship grows in the context of and by experiencing and navigating social relationships. School social relationships are therefore not only contexts, they are also processes and outcomes at the same time. So, that was the introduction. Let us now consider 3 core areas of socio-moral development and functioning that have a significant impact on learners' academic and non-academic flourishing, namely the quality of social relationships at school, teachers' own socio-moral and social-emotional functioning as part of their professionalism, and school culture and climate. I will briefly address each of them and take a few deep dives relating to school bullying. Regarding the quality of social relationships at school. Social relationships are a basic quality of human life. In DC and Ryan's self-determination theory, the need to feel connected to others, that is, to be accepted, respected, and appreciated, is conceptualized as a basic psychological need, besides the need for autonomy and the need for competence. The fulfillment of this need for relatedness is seen as essential for psychological growth. For example, the development of intrinsic motivation. Integrity, for example, internalization and assimilation of cultural practices. And for well-being, for example, life satisfaction and psychological health. School represents an important relationship context. Students navigate and actively form various social relationships with their peers, their teachers, and other school personnel. Positive social relationships at school are based on positive social interactions. They are characterized by both showing and experiencing respect, trust, emotional support, care, and closeness. Positive social relationships contribute to individuals' and groups' welfare and well-being. Conversely, negative social relationships at school involve negative social interactions and are characterized by conflict and distrust. They often involve interpersonal aggression and further negative social behaviors like, for example, ostracism, shaming, or social exclusion. Negative social relationships harm individuals' and groups' welfare and well-being. Let us now turn to student-teacher relationships as a first core relationship area at school. Grounded partially in the work of Robert Pianta and colleagues, the last 3 decades have seen a growing body of empirical research on the crucial role of the student-teacher relationship in school children's lives. For students, the quality of their social interactions and relationships with teachers has a considerable impact on their academic adjustment. This includes both core academic outcomes, for example, learning behavior, learning motivation, academic achievement, and non-academic outcomes, for example, health and well-being or social adaptation. Several meta-analyses, as well as second-order meta-analyses, have confirmed these findings. They indicate that positive student-teacher relationships are positively related to students' adjustment and negatively to students' maladjustment. Negative relationships, in contrast, are positively linked to students' maladjustment. For example, the recent second-order meta-analysis by Emslander and colleagues, published this spring, synthesized 26 meta-analyses spanning over 70 years of educational research, so 70. It involves 119 meta-analytic effect sizes based on approximately 2.64 million pre-kindergarten and K-12 students, most of them aged between 3 and 18 years. Based on their analysis, the authors found significant associations between student-teacher relationships and the following clusters or groups of student outcomes. I present them in descending order of strength of association. Appropriate behavior, school belonging and engagement, academic motivation, general well-being, behavior problems, so negative relationship, executive functions and self-control, academic emotions, and academic achievement. Emslander and colleagues conclude that, I quote, overall, student-teacher relationships can be considered key characteristics of the quality of instruction and the classroom and school climate. So this is something I want to emphasize here. The quality of student-teacher relationships is seen as one quality characteristic of instruction. I'm a bit hot, so let me just do this very briefly. Thank you so much. A second core relationship context at school refers to the peer context, more specifically to student-student relationships. In contrast to student-teacher relationships, which are hierarchical in nature, students' relationships with their peers are normally characterized by equality, cooperation, and symmetry. Mittich and colleagues identified the following quality dimensions in their meta-analyses: intimacy, closeness, relatedness, support, attachment, belonging, and lack of loneliness. Positive peer relationships promote the development of a child's self-image and interest, offer social support, facilitate the experience of social belonging and intimate feelings in the context of friendships, and support the acquisition of conflict resolution strategies, as Bill Hartop concluded already in 1996. Furthermore, it has been shown that positive relationships between students prevent aggression among peers, especially bullying. Thus, they help students learn to understand and do what is right and good to the best of their abilities, of course. Before we can now turn to school bullying for a deep dive, I will define it briefly. Bullying at school is a targeted, long-standing, negative behavior against a less powerful person in a group. It is increasingly seen as immoral in the sense that another student's welfare is systematically harmed and their human rights are violated. In the school context, all forms of bullying have been shown to negatively affect the social and learning climate in classrooms. School bullying impedes good classroom management. It entails grave concurrent and longitudinal psychosocial health and academic consequences for all students involved, that is, victims, bullies, and bystanders. The facets of academic achievement affected include, for example, grades, interest in school and in learning, academic aspirations, and school absenteeism. These negative consequences have been documented in a vast body of research over the past 4 decades, including a multitude of reviews and meta-analyses. So we can imagine, in a classroom, where there is bullying going on, and everybody knows what is going on, there is always this kind of disorderly climate. The targets, the victims of bullying, often expect to be attacked soon. Those who do the attack are waiting for good moments when the teacher doesn't look their way. Others who want to have fun are interested in having some action now. And still other students, also bystanders, might feel insecure because they feel like, well, I cannot do anything because if I try to help the victim, maybe I'm going to be the next victim. And so this kind of focus on these relationships, on the negative dynamics, takes away part of active learning time, instructional time, and it also affects the whole classroom climate. I give an example on these consequences. For example, Samara and colleagues recently conducted a meta-analysis involving about 258 children and adolescents aged 5 to 18 years. Their results confirm the link between involvement in bullying as bullies, victims, or bully victims, and confirm that children involved in these roles were less academically engaged, less academically motivated, and also had a lower academic achievement. Well, we might now argue that negative student-student relationships at school affect only specific groups of learners. However, relationship quality in one relationship domain often influences the nature and quality of relationships in other relationship domains. For example, the quality of student-teacher relationships was found to influence the quality of relationships between students and in the classroom as a whole. Hence, positive relationships between students and their teachers are linked to a positive classroom and school climate and to the prevention of bullying. Conversely, conflictual student-teacher relationships were found to be associated with both bullying perpetration and victimization, meaning being the victim of bullying, as shown, for example, in the recent meta-analysis by Krause and Smith. Their meta-analytic findings suggest an inherent interdependence between different forms of social relationships in a given educational context. Because teachers, as socialization agents, are expected to promote students' learning and development, not only academically, but also regarding their socio-moral and social-emotional functioning, we need to ask ourselves what that may mean with respect to teachers' own socio-moral, social-emotional functioning. Let us take a look. And I need another moment. Maybe you feel the heat as well? Yeah, but we are keeping on, and I try to keep you engaged and try to be connected to you all. So, teachers' socio-moral and social-emotional functioning as part of their professionalism. Teachers are important in students' life. Teachers set the tone and act as role models regarding the way social interactions, as the basis of social relationships, are implemented. They have a key role in promoting positive bonds among their students, both directly and indirectly. The latter, indirect influence, is understood as the invisible hand of the teacher, a concept introduced by Farmer, Ham, and colleagues. However, it is not clear whether and to what degree all teachers and educators are aware of this role as promoters of social relationships. For example, we know from research that kindergarten and primary school teachers are much more ready to see this kind of social relational aspect of their educational work. whereas secondary school teachers often have the self-understanding of, I am teaching subject matter. I am not a relational agent, and also I have so many classrooms, so many different students, I'm not their class teacher, so I tick differently. This is, put it very simplistically, very broadly. Moreover, it seems that when teachers are aware, some do not accept this role as part of their professional and educational assignment, and therefore as their pedagogical responsibility. This responsibility for promoting positive social relationships among students can be linked back to teachers' professional ethos. I define such ethos as the profession-related character of an individual teacher, as represented by their professional values and beliefs, condensed in their professional competencies, and manifested in their professional actions. Research on teachers' professional ethos has seen a revival in recent years, with an increase in not only conceptual but also empirical endeavors to grasp its essence. The latter has proven quite challenging due to the highly abstract and multidimensional nature of the ethos construct. At the same time, we have seen a growing research interest into the socio-moral and social-emotional functioning and dimensions of teachers' professional lives. Research endeavors have addressed constructs such as teachers' social and emotional competencies like social perspective taking, empathy, or compassion, teachers' emotional competence for inclusive education, or teachers' intention to implement appreciation in their relationships with students. To name only a few. In their research on teacher emotions, Huscher and colleagues conceptualized teachers' professional competence to regulate their emotions and their moral emotions as a core factor impacting teachers' health and well-being. In our own study on the relationship between student-teachers' social perspective-taking ability as self in relationship, like I showed you on the slide, and their well-being, we found a positive association with the following dimensions of psychological well-being: experience of positive social relationships, personal growth, and self-acceptance. We also found a positive association with global psychological well-being. So, having a good understanding of social relationships, being competent as a self in relationship, reaching higher levels of this perspective taking and coordination is also related to student teachers' well-being, psychological well-being, for example, feeling that they are growing, they are developing as persons. As the field is developing, empirical findings suggest that teachers' socio-moral or social-emotional competencies are positively related to student outcomes. For example, Colley summarized research on teachers' social and emotional competencies and highlighted their effect on students' social, emotional, and academic outcomes. However, meta-analyses addressing these impacts seem to be scarce. Part of this might be due to the fact that social-emotional learning interventions have mostly been student-centered so far, as Oliveira and colleagues state. To date, I found only one recent meta-analysis by Gebri et al. Involving about 10,000 students, however mostly college students. The meta-analysis indicated that teachers' social-emotional competence is positively linked to students' academic engagement. So the way teachers tick socially, emotionally, morally has an impact on student academic outcomes. However, the research is relatively new. With respect to school bullying, it seems that there has been only conceptual research on teachers' professional ethos so far. In my work in progress, I have developed a contextualized model of teachers' professional ethos in the area of school bullying. The model addresses 4 perspectives, with one of them, the content perspective, encompassing the following aspects: knowledge, attitudes and mindset, professional identity and mission, and translation into behavior. Related research has shown that these components are significantly negatively associated with teachers' intervention in bullying. Thus, for example, a lack of awareness, the feeling of uncertainty, or misinterpreting the extent of bullying that is going on. An attitude of not seeing bullying as a problem or even seeing it as normal behavior. A lack of sympathy or affection for the victim. A narrow view of violence as relating only to direct physical attacks. And the lack of confidence that they can intervene effectively are factors that prevent teachers from intervening in bullying situations. So from roughly 2005 on, we have had this research, starting only slowly, that tried to see what do teachers in the context of bullying situations, are they aware of bullying, do they intervene, why do they, how do they feel confident, why don't they intervene, what hinders them? And it seems that part of this might really be related to this kind of social, moral, emotional awareness and functioning of teachers. Some of these factors were also considered in a meta-analysis by van Werseveld and colleagues. They investigated the components of anti-bullying programs and investigated which components actually enhance the effectiveness of these programs. Their meta-analytic results indicated that the most effective components were those that reinforced the following factors: teachers' anti-bullying attitudes and norms, and teachers' self-efficacy, knowledge, and competence in reducing bullying. So again, we see teachers' own social, emotional, moral functioning seems to play a part in the way they not only react in bullying situations, but also it impacts the way the interventions are effective. I am optimistic that the next decade will see an increasing number of empirical studies investigating the role of teachers' professional ethos in school bullying and related also to contextual factors like, for example, school ethos. So far, we have considered both student-teacher and student-student relationships, as well as teachers' socio-moral, social-emotional functioning, and their relation to student outcomes. From a systemic ecological perspective, it is also important to consider the broader school context that is school culture and climate. And this is the moment where I take another sip. As we have seen, social relationships and social belonging form the very ground on which school life unfolds. That life is co-determined not only by contextual and cultural factors, but also by the various agents, individuals, and the way they establish and maintain social relationships. We might term this the lived culture of a school. In accordance with Schoen and Tedley, school culture is defined here as including all interactions and relationships, and it refers to what is being lived, done, and implemented. School climate can then be seen as encompassing individuals' perceptions and subjective impressions of the quality of relationships, of the way of living together, and so forth. According to this view, school climate is one result of a particular lived school culture. School climate has been identified as one essential factor determining core student outcomes like, for example, academic achievement, school absenteeism, aggressive behavior, or psychosocial health and well-being. Hence, a positive climate is related positively to students' adjustment and negatively to students' maladjustment, although some reviews point out that there is some mixed evidence. Meta-analytic evidence offers a clearer picture and confirms these relationships. For example, the recent meta-analysis by Erdem and Kaya, involving about 208,000 elementary and secondary school students, revealed a positive association between school climate and students' academic achievement in several subject areas. Addressing behavioral outcomes, Reeves and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis of longitudinal studies to investigate the association between school climate and students' problem behavior. The latter included, for example, violence perpetration, general conduct problems, and school delinquency. The meta-analysis involved about 40,000 students, most of them attending middle and high school. The results yielded a significant association between students' perception of school climate and behavioral problems over time, that is, 1 or 2 years later, respectively. Research on school bullying confirms these findings. Several meta-analyses have shown that a positive school climate is an important protective factor against bullying, whereas a negative school climate has been consistently associated with aggressive behavior and bullying. The recent meta-analysis by Lee and colleagues addressed the association between school climate and cyber victimization, that is, being a victim of cyberbullying. The study included a total sample of about 123,000 students between 9 and 16 years of age. The authors found that school climate was significantly negatively linked to cyber victimization. This led them draw the following conclusion. I quote, "In this sense, students in a negative school climate seem to be easier and safer targets for cyberbullies and have less capacity to resist or deter cyberbullying victimization." End of quote. So, if you are excluded and isolated and have no one to stand up for you, if it is normal and seen as normal that someone is always being picked on, then you are at risk to become a target of bullying, though you are just a kid like everyone else and have done nothing to deserve this. I want to emphasize here that there is no justification or excuse for school bullying. It is our responsibility to help students, teachers, schools, parents, communities, and society as a whole to understand this. We need to collaborate and find even better ways to live the positive side of social relationships and do what is right and good. Well, what a journey we have made together. Let me now briefly bring the different strands together and wind up. You know my drill? Because I have lots of heats also from the lamps. Okay. When I started to work in teacher education 20 years ago, a dear colleague of mine who first worked as a teacher and afterwards became a teacher educator said something that I will never forget. You know, Eveline, you cannot not have a relationship with your students. You cannot not have a relationship, even if it's not a positive one. You cannot not have a relationship. This made me realize that social relationships in school and in the whole school context, and in particular, of course, the student-teacher relationship, are a necessary, although not sufficient condition for academic success. Such academic success includes not only test results and grades, but also psychosocial dimensions like feeling connected to the school, feeling safe and well, not dropping out of school, having aspirations for the future, and feeling prepared for the complex, sometimes messy and confusing world. If we see development as the aim of education, as Wolfgang Edelstein stated in reference to John Dewey, we can expand our focus. We shift from emphasizing quantifiable academic outcomes in learners towards an understanding of education as inherently involving the whole human being. Being human means that we need to feel connected to others, give meaning to our existence, have a goal in life, feel competent in what we do, and experience autonomy and growth. And this is described in research on well-being and human flourishing, and also what I stated at the outset of this keynote. Protecting and promoting positive relationships at school means to really promote this developing and being a whole, entire human being that can exercise agency. And this is more and something else than just touchy-feely stuff. Kuschelpädagogik. A notion that I have encountered many times in my professional life, especially in the context of my work in bullying prevention. If we take a systemic perspective, according to Bronfenbrenner, we recognize that formal education, as involving several layers in individuals' ecosystem, has a huge formative influence, both on the development and on the shapes of social relationships. I try to capture this in my work on the moral dimensions of bullying, particularly in the social ecological process model I developed with my friend and colleague, Sonja Perren. We published the model in the 3rd edition of the Handbook of Moral Development. This is the first time in the history of the handbook that school bullying has been included as a morally relevant phenomenon. It shows that we can actually build bridges between research traditions. So we have this strand of moral developmental research, we have the strand of aggression, bullying, etc. research, but they were not really directly connected for quite a long time. So bear with me for another moment. This is the model we developed. And you can always write me an email and let me know that you want the slides, the model, whatever. The model describes how bullying evolves over time. So these are really the arrows moving from the top right around this circle. Because bullying is not something that just puff is there out of the blue. It develops over time. And what you see in the center here is the context of the school. You see the gray circle, the gray area is school, socio-moral, culture, and climate. And in the center, you have the classroom, socio-moral, culture, and climate, as well as students' characteristics and behaviors, teachers' characteristics and behaviors, which includes interactions, relationships. And you have many of these bidirectional arrows trying to capture the interconnectedness and the complexity of social life at school. And the outcome, if bullying can really establish itself and become chronic, it really means that over time and also concurrently, it has detrimental psychosocial and psychosocial moral consequences, so top left. Because, among other things, at school, it creates a toxic social, socio-moral culture and climate. And such a culture and climate is also dysfunctional in the sense of it is more difficult to really have good learning opportunities, good learning climate. And it makes teachers' work much more harder. So these are my messages. Almost there. I maintain first and foremost that the promotion of positive social relationships at school has worth and value in itself. And I emphasize this because many years ago, when I tried to find a research funding for this relationship, teachers' socio-moral competences, their well-being, etc., I got the feedback, well, as long as you cannot prove that it also has a positive impact on grades, we're not going to fund your research. And I find, well, of course this is important. Academic outcomes are important, but healthy social relationships are worthy and valuable in themselves as well. And of course, they gain additional relevance because they help foster students' and teachers' health and well-being. They foster both students' academic and teachers' professional success. And we have a variety of conceptual models, like, for example, Jennings and Greenberg's model of the pro-social classroom, the Castle social-emotional learning framework, or Collins' model of teacher thriving, emphasizing these connections. So this is just one example. I didn't want to bring up model after model because it might be too confusing, also too demanding for me to try to really relate them all meaningfully to each other in a short time span. So as an example, the Castle framework, social-emotional learning, of course there are other approaches to promote social-emotional learning. I included it because it very well shows the embeddedness of social life and social competencies, social relationships at school. And so we see that the outermost circle, homes and communities, involve schools, and schools are included in classrooms. And at the bottom of these circles, you also see that, of course, we have interventions at different system levels. So SEL curriculum and instruction, school-wise practices and policies, and family and community partnerships. This all relates, of course, to Bronfenbrenner's social ecological model and shows again this kind of interconnectedness and complexity of life at school. Now, for students to be empowered towards exercising their socio-moral agency, that is, in, through, and for social relationships, to learn to think ahead about the potential consequences of their actions for others, to regulate their social behavior through self-sanctions, and reflect also on the soundness as well as the meaning and morality of their actions, we need to provide healthy, positive relationship contexts at school. And we cannot place the burden of this provision on the shoulders of teachers, principals, school counselors, school social workers, and schools only. We need to go bigger. Thus, referring back to school bullying, after pursuing an evidence-based whole school approach to address school bullying for about 2 decades, and I was part of that, we have recently seen an extension of this perspective. A few years ago, a group of international experts expanded the whole school approach to bullying to encompass a whole education approach. The focus is now on the education system as such, which provides the foundations and framework for the functioning of individual schools. We may use this approach to inspire our work on improving social life at school in general. Accordingly, to promote positive social relationships at school, we need consistent and explicit, as well as fleshed out, links between the following levels and mechanisms. I move through the model from top to bottom. Legislation and policy making, teacher training and support, curriculum development, teaching and learning, the creation of a safe school and classroom environment, the involvement of all stakeholders at school, including parents, student empowerment and participation. I want to emphasize this. collaboration and partnership with relevant external partners, and the ongoing collection of data on both the quality of school social relationships and the well-being of students, teachers, and further staff. And of course, and this is carrying coal to Newcastle or pouring water into the river Rhine, Wasser in den Rhein tragen. In our work as researchers and educators, we need to provide evidence-based Tier 1, 2, and 3 programs to address bullying, discrimination, social exclusion, violence, radicalization, and extremism, and help promote healthy, positive social relationships. In this keynote, I have drawn on disciplines and research areas such as, for example, the lifespan approach to development, education and educational psychology, moral psychology, research on aggression, school bullying, and teacher professional development, and many, many more. What I have offered here is the bigger picture, painted with very broad brush strokes. I wanted to show you the forest and not only the trees. Therefore, we boarded an aeroplane together and studied the landscape from up in the sky. And of course, there is so much that I had to neglect. The role of culture and the local, ethnic, and national context, a differentiation of age groups, school levels, and school forms, gender-related issues, a discussion of specific interventions and their effect on student outcomes, a consideration of methodological issues, for example, as relating to measurement, and a consideration also of bidirectional moderation, mediation, and multi-level effects in presenting the empirical evidence, to name only a very few. All that remains now is to thank you so much for your attention and for bearing with me despite these limitations. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Eveline, for this wonderful talk on such an important and timely topic. So time for questions, please. Yes? Okay, he's...
Okay, thank you so much for the valuable keynote. I was wondering, so what kind of advice or recommendation would you give to pre-service teachers once they recognize a possible rising bullying situation, how to deal with it?
Thank you very much for this highly relevant question. And unfortunately, right now, and I can speak particularly of the Swiss context, we can still do more to prepare teachers for dealing with bullying. And in my prevention and intervention work at schools, but also in teacher education, teacher further education, I started to take a look at the bigger picture. So the point really is there any awareness of bullying in the school? Is there any kind of guidelines, of conceptions? Is there any place, any person, a student teacher, a pre-service teacher, can go and voice their concerns? Because the whole school approach really means if and what to do, no, let me put it the other way. Whether and to what degree bullying can really establish itself and become chronic depends also on the school culture and climate, and the classroom culture and climate. And so it takes the whole school. So when I'm talking to teachers, I often tell them, you are not lone fighters. Don't be the lone fighters. Go to your principals, school social workers, ask for conceptions, ask for guidelines. Take a look at the wider circle of experts in the sense of, okay, is there a school counselor? Are there any clinics associated with the schools that maybe also treat students regarding health and well-being, also psychological health issues, and so on? The point is, it is very difficult, and I know many teachers who have been telling me this. I've also experienced it in the prevention work, that very often a group of teachers at a school are not always on the same page. So some of them feel like, okay, bullying is important. Others feel like this is a normal part of life. Others say like, this is touchy-feely stuff. So it really takes time. And I remember working with one group of teachers and the school principal. The school principal afterwards came to me and said, well, what you've been doing with us actually is school development. And that's the hard message I have to give out time and again. You know, there is not one strategy. The most important thing is to be sensitized, not look the other way. It doesn't mean that you have to react immediately. You can still think about it, seek advice with your colleagues, and involve other people. But the point really is try to become active, but also try to be prepared that maybe everybody is not on the same page. And so it takes time. It really takes years. But at the same time, a lot of bullying prevention work really relates to social emotional learning. And this is tier 1, this is general prevention, you know. So if we promote social emotional learning, we are already doing much to have this kind of better culture and climate at the school. It's not sufficient. At the same time, it's important to do already that. So you see, I cannot give you a short answer. So please let me know if you want to know more or if you feel like, helped a bit. You can also get in touch with me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much, Eveline, for the engaged speech. You said it's bullying in school, but you also mentioned cyberbullying. And that's, I think, another dimension. And you also mentioned the steps from kindergarten to K-12. Is it worse also to start in kindergarten? We had an introduction, three old kids are on the smartphones, and maybe the figures also show cyberbullying is a very big problem. Do you have any suggestions how to deal with that, even if we have social, moral functioning and awareness?
Thank you very much, Sabine. Another highly relevant question. I have to make a few remarks, first of all. I collaborated for a long time with Françoise Alsacker. She was a collaborator of Dan Olweus, and she was the first to even suggest that preschool and kindergarten might also be affected by bullying. Not the same kind of mature forms, but still bullying might be an issue. And she was confronted with quite some hate because of that. Her research, however, showed that this is indeed the case. What we also know from research, and this is something that we have to follow up constantly because the cyber world, social media, etc., are evolving and developing further all the time. But from the early 2000s on, we have had research on cyberbullying, and of course one of the big questions always were, is it the same or something different from bullying? And time and again, we have had research showing there is a high degree of overlap between online and offline forms of bullying. So it really means if you want to do prevention work or intervention work, you cannot just look at the offline or the online side of the medal. You need to include both. And the point really is, and this is very, very tricky because you are talking about preschool age now, the point really is it takes time to develop this kind of socio-moral maturity of really understanding other people's perspectives, understanding the consequences of your actions for others. And so, especially for preschool children, this is a huge learning field. We have the fascination of the media, the electronic media per se, and also we are not sure, but I'm not an expert in that field, I've just read a bit about it, whether whether and how children differentiate between offline live social relationships and so-called parasocial relationships on social media. So what does it really mean to them, and how can we prepare them for reflecting on the consequences of their actions if they are not really aware of them? And in the context of empathy literature, and I'd try to be very, very brief, in the context of empathy literature, we find, of course, Eisenberg's and other colleagues' work that suggest, well, there are different stages in the development of empathy, and this kind of inductive educational style, induktiver Erziehungsstil, are very important in this regard. So helping children make meaning of what they are doing, understand that what they are doing affects others in negative way is a core aspect, because one of the big dangers of the cyber world is that you can do something by just pushing a button. I mean, nowadays it's not even a button, it's on a screen, you know, a field on a screen, and something happens somewhere. You don't know who is going to see it, and you don't see the other child's face. Because in natural social contexts, children have lots of information about how the other person might be feeling. And an educator, a teacher, can also support them and say, but look at this, you did that, and now she is sad, she is crying. So what can we now do to help her? Because you know, if you cry, you're not feeling good, and you know that it's not nice to feel bad. And so we have much more educational opportunities in the real world. And starting to establish this understanding is very difficult. I bring up another point very, very briefly. I call this the so-called operationalization problem. You know, we always hear teachers, parents say, I told her 100 times, she knows the rule, why did she still do it? The point is, rules are highly abstract. We have so much expertise in knowing rules, understanding rules, contextualizing rules, apply them also in other relationship contexts, so referring to horizontal development here, that we are just, you know, we do it automatically. Children have to learn that. And even if you have a child that knows it's not okay to harass someone, it might still be the case, and actually this is an anecdote of myself, it's actually the case that you see your child doing something and you say, well, but I told you we do not harass other people. Oh, this is also harassing. Aha! So they really have to learn across contexts to make meaning, to understand what that means, and that rules, although they are very abstract, refer to concrete situations. And we, as adults, we talk about situations like they are discrete boxes. Situation A, B, C, D. For children, their experience is just a flow. They don't think in terms of situations. So this is also something that we need to help them grasp. You know, when this and this happened and you did that and that, remember. So you see, it takes a lot of work, and actually your question stimulates me also to start reading up the current literature now, the current research on how can we do this? Because I don't have a final answer. I was just very happy at the panel on the first day, the expert panel, Education and Digitalization, to hear the expert from Israel say, well, children's brains tick differently if they are in real life situations as opposed to social situations online. So there is still much we have to do, we have to learn, and I feel like we really have to accompany our children. So my philosophy, and this is the last sentence that I'm going to utter in response to your question, my philosophy is we are developing selves in relationship that accompany and try to guide the developing self in relationship vis-a-vis. So we are developing and we are guiding, accompanying other developing individuals. And development as the aim of education means that although education is normative, we cannot impose the aim of an individual's development, how this individual has to turn out ourselves. We can try to guide them, we can accompany them, we can stimulate them, we can have positive outlook and hope, but it is their development as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, please. If I may. I mean, thank you very much for the... Does it work? It's on. Does it work? Okay. Yes, thank you. So thank you very much for the really inspirational and timely as never before presentation, raising issues that I feel are really at the core of further social development. In this context, it made me wonder what tools do we have as teachers in schools to influence the socio-moral development? Because when I was growing up and going to school, I remember having a lot of literature lessons. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, thank you. There's some echo. So literature is one of the tools that can promote self-reflection, empathy, and eventually socio-moral development, values, and all the beautiful things you were talking about. But I'm noticing less and less lessons, and my daughter, who's now 10, she doesn't have any literature. And that worries me a lot. So my question is, first of all, what are the possible tools or context matter subjects that could promote the development of values and socio-moral socio-moral development as a whole? And so literature could be one of them, but also where are we moving and where can we do better? I hope it makes sense.
Thank you very much for your question. I try to be as brief as possible because, okay. Yes, literature is an important element, and we have wonderful programs out there for social-emotional learning. For example, within the CASTLE frameworks, we have the PATHS curriculum and other curricula, but we can also start very, very small as teachers and use instruments that have been around for many decades in the context of moral democratic education. So just community schools, for example, as a big project, but also this kind of participatory approaches like Klassenrat, it is called in German, so like class hour, where you have some kind of participatory approach and students can voice their meanings, can ask questions, can make suggestions, bring up wishes, etc. And I feel that literature is very important, and the point really is, even if you use literature, children's books, whatever, in your lessons, it also means that you yourself must feel safe and, how should I say, empowered to really implement this, because only using good children's book doesn't guarantee that it promotes social-emotional learning. So yourself as a teacher also need to be socially, emotionally, morally fit and need also to know about tools and how to use them, because interaction, making meaning, discourse, discussion, critical reflection as children grow older are all very important elements. Role play, so I could say much more, but I keep it short. We can talk afterwards if you like. Thank you.
Yeah. So please, a last short question.
And a short answer.
I saw perhaps the so, okay, we are done, I think. So thank you very much, Eveline, for this wonderful talk and the inspiring discussion. And let me say a word. All this, the topic and the discussion took me back to MC and to Aristotle. first one talking about the whole being and talking about virtues, cultivating virtues in order to have this whole subject, and talking about also character development. And I think what we have missed during the last year is this character development in schools. And this is something that we have to dive in. So, please join.
Thank you. Thank you, too. Thank you. Thank you. Oh.
Any organizers? So thank you so much. So I hope you will enjoy the rest of the day and have safe travels back home.
Thank you.
Yes.